Do you think humans are hardwired for monogamy?
There is a high level of infidelity and probably a high level of dissatisfaction within monogamous relationships.
But everywhere in the world, the vast majority of people have one partner at a time.
We are monogamous, but also we just cheat, and that's just who we are.
If I'm good at being monogamous, I shouldn't be having these fantasies.
Wanting to have more than one relationship doesn't mean that they're running away from stability.
That sounds like non-monogamy.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Queer Collective podcast. I'm your host, Carbon.
And I'm Emily.
And that's it. It's just the two of us today, which we haven't done in a long time, but we have a buttload of information for you on polyamory, so let's dive into it. And this episode is presented by Vizzy Hard Seltzer and Field, but more on that later.
In this episode, we embark on a provocative exploration of whether ethical non-monogamy is truly natural. What began as my own straightforward deep dive into the history of polyamory has quickly evolved into an investigation that revealed surprising connections between the decline of non-monogamous practices and the rise of agricultural societies, capitalism, patriarchy, and land ownership. In this episode, we'll challenge conventional wisdom by dissecting these historical shifts and consider how the resurgence of polyamory today may be a response to these deeply ingrained societal structures. Join us as we peel back the layers to uncover the complex interplay between human relationships, societal norms, and the ever-changing landscape of love.
Interplay. I like it. And in this episode, Emily has done a lot of research to get this information out to you listeners at home, 22 pages to be exact. So it would really help out the podcast if you do like the content that we put out every other week, to leave a 5-star review if you're listening on your favorite podcast app, or leave a comment, like the video on YouTube if you're listening there.
I felt like the most important part to start would be defining a few terms. The first thing I wanted to explain is polyamory. So even if you look at the term, poly meaning many and amory meaning love, so many loves. And at its core, polyamory is the practice of engaging in multiple romantic relationships simultaneously with the knowledge and consent of everyone involved. Really, it's about love in its plural form, not just a physical connection, but an emotional one. The next piece is ethical non-monogamy. Now, this is a broader, more so of an umbrella term, and it encompasses all forms of non-monogamous relationships that are practiced ethically and consensually. Of course, another key here.
Yeah, otherwise it's just cheating.
Period. So it includes polyamory, but also other forms such as open relationships, swinging, relationships anarchy, etc., etc.
And then what's the difference between polyamory and polygamy?
So the key difference with polygamy is really that it's just one man with many wives. So it's very strict. It also doesn't recognize everyone's autonomy, especially the women involved. It's very patriarchal.
Gotcha.
We are not talking about polygamy today.
Yeah, we don't like the patriarchy.
Moving on to our next section, which I'm actually very, very excited about. This is talking about whether or not it's natural.
Oh, okay.
So I want to just first pose a question to you and to our listeners at home. Just think it in your little brain. Not your little brain, sorry, your very big brain. Do you think humans are hardwired for monogamy?
This is just me guessing, but I think that it is a mix of yes and no. I think that for some people it works really, really well. For some people, it doesn't. However, it is a statistical fact that a high number of people in relationships have affairs or cheat on their partner in some way. And this is most relationships that we're talking about, a high percentage. There is a high level of infidelity and probably a high level of dissatisfaction within monogamous relationships. So I'm going to go ahead and guess, to round it all off, that it is natural.
The biggest thing for me that I guess would be against ethical non-monogamy is just the primal reaction that I've seen us and our friends have around fears of abandonment and I guess possessiveness and those kinds of feelings that can make me question it a little bit, if that makes sense. And our ability also, I think, to form very deep emotional connections with people too. That is the one thing I would say, even after all my research, that I'm still a little bit that could be a bit of an indication that we do like, especially for some people, we do really enjoy monogamy.
Right.
So academics will definitely argue in both directions.
And just so that everybody knows, a quick disclaimer here, a lot of the research that is being presented refers to people as men and women. Obviously, this is a Queer Collective podcast. We know that gender and identity is far beyond the binary. It's not just men and women. It's also not just male and female. There's intersex people. There's people who are non-binary. It's beyond that spectrum. But unfortunately, historically, research has put us into these boxes. So this is what we're presenting today throughout the research.
Our first one for yes, we are naturally monogamous is a biological anthropologist, Helen E. Fisher. And she argues that monogamy and adultery are both natural. She states that we've evolved to what she calls a dual human reproductive strategy. We are an animal that forms pair bonds. We have a tremendous drive to fall in love and rear our own children as a team of two, but we are also adulterous with a predisposition of restlessness. She believes monogamy has evolved over 4.4 million years ago when our ancestors were coming down from the trees, as 97% of mammals do not pair up to rear their young. But everywhere in the world, the vast majority of people have one partner at a time. So I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Already you can see there's a point that the other side would be using. 97% of mammals do not pair bond.
Right.
And oftentimes we do look to animals to see if something is quote unquote natural. Right. But her saying that the vast majority of people do have one partner at a time is an interesting stat. All around the world, different cultures, but we do tend to do this.
Right.
Next, B, our brain circuitry for romantic love and deep attachment is an indication that our inclination towards pair bonding and monogamy. So this is kind of what I was saying before.
Why is that an indication? Just deep connection itself is an indication for monogamy? Can you not have deep connection with multiple people?
I think that's what she's missing potentially and is like inferring her own maybe bias on it. But I think the fact that we're able to get so deep and have that kind of attachment, like an anxious attachment, for example, like what I was saying, perhaps can indicate that. Whereas it seems as though the animal kingdom doesn't necessarily do that.
Doesn't have anxious attachment potentially?
Who knows?
So we're the fucked ones.
Yeah. And then C, her evolutionary theory on pair bonding is that this evolution happened for an ecological reason. So thinking back to early homos, as we started to walk on two legs, you're such a child.
The homos.
So as we started to walk on two legs and live in dangerous grasslands, she believes we wanted to mate and form pair bonds out of safety and necessity to protect our young. Men wouldn't be able to protect more than one woman from other males or predators. And now that we're walking on two legs, we have to carry our offspring in our arms instead of on our back, meaning that our hands are not available to cover, like, carry other important resources or do other tasks.
This is an interesting line here that we're following, which also follows the theory of evolution, which is also just a theory.
Exactly. These are definitely theories. Like she's saying, I think a lot, right? Like this is her theory.
I think a lot.
And then D, her evolutionary theory on adultery alongside pair bonding. So she thinks that they are a duo, basically. She just thinks that like we are monogamous and we cheat. And that's
what we do?
Right. So she said for men, she believes it has to do with increasing your ancestral line. And for women, she believes it's a safeguard yourself, extra goods, resources, extra protection. And if her partner gets injured or dies, one of these extra lovers might come in and help with the children. Even thinking some of the children are his is an extra insurance policy.
So that's kind of like non-consensual polyamory then.
It's just cheating.
Yeah. It's non-ethical.
Yeah.
And non-consensual.
Yeah.
But it's still playing with the lines of polyamory, of seeking other connections for whatever reason, whether it be like safety, resources, etc., just wanting a deeper connection. But it's interesting that she's saying we are monogamous, but also we just cheat and that's just who we are.
Yeah.
Versus there could be something else here.
Exactly. So the next piece is the standard narrative. And my source for this is the book Sex at Dawn, which I'm going to be referring to for the next little section here.
Okay.
According to the standard narrative, we have an inherent reason to enforce our partner's sexual exclusivity. Males gain the assurance that any children resulting from the union would be his offspring, while females secure a lifelong companion who delivers protection.
Because only a man can provide for a woman.
I mean, there's plenty of ways that the standard narrative falls apart, and we're about to get into that in now our exploration of why we think humans are not naturally monogamous.
Okay.
So this is continuing to be from the book Sex at Dawn, which I highly recommend people check out. Let's chat about how the standard narrative falls apart under a closer examination. The novel Sex at Dawn by Christopher Ryan and Calcutta Jetha believes that scientists who developed and followed the standard narrative came in trying to prove their hypothesis correct, which has given them a confirmation bias.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what most research is. No matter how unbiased you try to be, you do have a bias.
Yeah.
And historically, we know from the Is Queerness Natural episode that researchers have historically gone in already with looking to prove their bias rather than just explore.
So a confirmation bias is when folks process information by looking for or interpreting information that is consistent with their existing beliefs. This biased approach to decision making is usually unintentional and results in a person ignoring information that is inconsistent with their beliefs. So like you said, in the Is Queerness Natural episode, Seb, our guest, explains how scientists have ignored queerness in animals for
however long they've been researching them.
Exactly. Anthropologists often mistakenly believe that early human behavior reflected modern cultural practices, which allow them to reinforce the normalcy of monogamy in nuclear families.
I mean, we could already sort of hint at the debunking of this assumption based on what we already know about how many indigenous cultures already had two-spirit people. That already, in my opinion, erases the assumption that we lived like that.
And the last point here is that it's about separating cultural expectations from innate human tendencies so that we can start to follow our desires and understand them as natural behavior. Because if you're feeling it, it's probably kind of natural, right?
I don't know if that can be said about everything.
Oh, yeah, true. That's a good point. Okay. So the standard narrative relies on false assumptions of the lives of early humans. First, the standard narrative explanation on why we cheat assumes an environment of restricted resources. The lives and habits of primitive tribes demonstrate that early humans had plenty of food. There was no reason to fight over or hoard resources, including sexual partners.
So the habits that they had essentially indicates that there wasn't a scarcity mindset when it comes to food and partners, etc.
Not even just mindset, there just wasn't scarcity.
Interesting. Okay, continue.
So the standard narrative also requires a man to care whether or not their partner's offspring are his. An idea known as paternity certainty. In most early human civilizations, male tribe members did not care whether or not they were a biological parent. In fact, they didn't have a concept for a two-parent household, instead being accustomed to a communal fatherhood system in which all of the village's adults contribute to a child's growth. The idea of a child belonging to any one couple would have been an absurd concept to early humanity and to tribes that still maintain pre-agricultural practices.
Are we saying the agricultural and revolution really fucked us up and did all this?
I'm definitely about to get there.
Okay.
Quickly, though, I would like to come back to Helen Fisher. She kind of also explains why she thinks cheating is in our genes, and I thought this was interesting. I don't really like her theory of why we do it, but her examples of cheating being in our genes, I think, is actually a good example of why we're non-monogamous.
Interesting. Okay.
So I'm going to read this.
Do go off, Helen.
So, of course, she thinks we're historically pair bonders, whatever, but cheating is in our genes. So, everywhere in the world, people are adulterers. Even where you can get your head chopped off for it or stoned to death, people continue to do it, meaning that it probably has some biological predisposition.
Interesting. So similar how people are queer all over the world, regardless of laws and how badly you could get punished or even killed for it, would indicate that queerness is natural.
Exactly.
Boom.
I thought that was actually a really good example too. Just the fact that you can get the death penalty for it, but people are still doing it. It's like there's some like really innate urge there.
Like a primitive thing, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay, B. Scientists are finding biological predispositions that some of us have that would make us more likely to cheat.
What? Such as what?
A Swedish study studied a gene in the vasopressin system among 552 men. Some men had 0 copies of the gene, some had 1 copy, some had 2. And they found that the more copies of the gene that you had, the less stable your primary relationship was, which she believes unstable relationships can lead to adultery. It's not like a perfect link. They weren't studying adultery, but stability kind of does show potentially like a linkage there.
I would like to interject there and say that that's not always the case. Instability leads to non-monogamy or even adultery. I do know of stories where people feel the most polyamorous or the most infidelity when their relationship is the happiest, the most loving, the most stable. So that's not necessarily the case.
I would say for the vast majority, like if we're looking at the reasons that some people cheat, a lot of it's because like they're unhappy in their relationship, but they don't want to leave, right? But you have some outliers who are people maybe who have some own personal trauma where living a life of stability makes them feel more anxious and like they need to go and do something else, right? Or just maybe that's a link to being a non-monogamous person. It's like you're happy and you want to go have another relationship.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. Because like wanting to have more than one relationship for a lot of people doesn't mean that they're running away from stability, but rather they want to expand the happiness and all of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. The next example is a gene in our immune system. I thought this was pretty interesting. So it also seems to play a role in adultery. We tend to be drawn to people who have a different set of genes in this part of our immune system. And data shows that when you're with a partner who is very similar in this part of their immune system, women in particular are more likely to be adulterous, especially when they're ovulating.
What?
Interesting, right?
They're horny.
I think more so like you are wanting to produce offspring, but you're also wanting to produce offspring with a really good immune system. So there's like a longevity to their life, right?
Oh, wow.
And if you're mating with somebody who has the same type of immune system as you, it's likely that like your lineage is going to potentially all die if you get some kind of sickness.
That's like just like a primitive biological instinct then, huh?
Yeah. Sadly, me and you always get sick at the same time. So
yeah, so we're fucked. We're not having kids.
Our children. She believes that we've evolved 3 distinctly different brain systems for mating and reproduction, which are sex drive, feelings of intense romantic love, and feelings of deep attachment. But they're not always well connected. She says you can lie in bed at night and feel deep emotional attachment for one person and then swing wildly into feelings of intense romantic love for someone else, and then swing wildly into feeling your sex drive for someone you've barely ever met. Which I'm like, Helen, that sounds like non-monogamy. That's why I put it in this section. So jumping back to Sex at Dawn by Christopher Ryan and Calcutta Jetha, we have a few different pieces of evidence here of why humans are non-monogamous. So we're going to go through some societal evidence, biological evidence, historical customs, and many other things. Our first societal evidence is that the two argue that factors like divorce and infidelity rates indicate that lifelong sexual exclusivity is not innate. They believe that humans are wired to sexually bond with multiple partners, which is a primal urge that's reflected in the popularity of group sex porn that people gravitate to. Ooh. They were looking at Pornhub for this research.
They sure were.
Monogamy may feel natural because it's culturally enforced, but humans at their core still crave sexual variety and multiple partner relationships, even if it's just in their fantasies.
Big agree on that. Even for people who stay monogamous their whole life, a lot of the time it's sexual fantasies playing in their head that could involve their partner, but also could just not involve their partner at all.
The emphasis on things being culturally enforced goes back to what I was saying before, like these feelings of jealousy and this primal like attachment fear that happens when you first start non-monogamy. I do wonder if that's just because of what's been culturally enforced for us to like have this type of fear. Yeah, I wonder if it's more so a cultural fear that someone is going to leave you, this other person is a threat. Another idea around if your partner has another partner, then you're being cucked, and that being kind of like a dirty word as well. Like all of these cultural ideas are things that give you this fear and this bad feeling rather than it potentially being a natural fear. The next piece that I want to jump into is biological evidence. So male and female genitalia is unique from other primates and is designed to accommodate multiple partners.
Say that again, what?
Let me tell you. Okay, so a female reproductive organ can distinguish between the sperm of two different partners and does select the one that is genetically stronger.
No way.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah. Your insides automatically are like, that's the strong one. And then selects, because now we know, which I didn't know for the longest time, it's not the sperm that swims the fastest. It's actually
the one with the best vibes.
The one with the best vibes that enters through, and it is selected, not just given. You have to earn it.
The way females experience arousal also points towards a polyamorous past. While males often need to take a break after one orgasm before engaging in sex again, females can engage in multiple back-to-back orgasms, indicating that group sex involving multiple men was once the norm, or potentially gay stuff was happening.
Oh my God. This is getting really saucy.
A little juicy for sure. The funny thing about this book too is they like really go into depth on how to pleasure the female anatomy as well.
I love that. I quite love that.
They're like, people don't always know how to do this, so here's how you do it.
I'm a fan.
Yeah.
I don't love that it focuses on like male and female relationships specifically because like, yes, you could be having group sex like one woman with multiple men, but maybe it's not multiple men.
I guess they're talking about like reproduction,
right?
If that makes sense, like having kids.
Yeah, there is also the design of the penis itself, that it is meant to sort of scoop out the semen from other men that have ejaculated in the female. And that could also indicate that group sex was very popular.
It's true. And I'm pretty sure it was that penises with like a bigger head were evolutionary. Like they designed to have bigger and bigger heads so that they could keep doing that.
Right.
Penis head.
Thank you for that.
I think also something interesting to add maybe is about what Seb said about like the queer theory, like queer animals were meant to be like the support system too, you know? So I think one thing that this book is missing, sadly, is sort of the element of queer theory involved into it. But what I loved about our discussion with Seb on Is Queerness Natural? They said that potentially the evolution of queer people who biologically can't reproduce, potentially if you're engaging with like female on female pleasure and male on male pleasure, is because they're like biologically meant to be like aunts, uncles, support systems and create that like communal family effect. Like not everyone needs to be reproducing all the time, because if you're looking back to earlier societies, it could be much harder for people to like raise a kid altogether. It's a lot of resources going towards this like one kid growing up. And like if you're having many all at the same time, that could be a really big strain on the group. So our next point is the widespread practice of monogamy may be changing the anatomy of modern humans.
What you talking about, Willis?
Okay, so human testicles are, I'm such a child. Human testicles are over time becoming smaller and smaller. And in recent generations, men are producing semen at slower rates.
Oh, like the whole outrage of like men becoming infertile over time. I know a lot of conservatives are quite worried about this.
Well, it's believed that this is because testicles used to be bigger to accommodate for group sex practices and the need to hold more semen. And since numerous societies have enforced monogamy over the course of centuries, an increasing number of human males are no longer needing to produce mass amounts of semen.
Just little baby balls.
Just the image of like mass amounts of semen. Just little baby balls. That's all we need.
That's all we need, little baby balls now.
So this next section we want to jump into is around historic customs. So this book believes that non-monogamy is showcased in sexual customs of foraging tribes that are still operating throughout the world. And in prehistoric societies, polyamory promoted social bonding and lowered the negative effects of jealousy and provided new parents with ample communal support for raising their young.
I can see like the community support. Like right now I'm really seeing like both sides of it. Like there is like abandonment issues. I relate to that. Anxiousness, anxious attachment, jealousy, the whole deep connection thing. But on the other hand, like support and community.
If we weren't taught to have such deep attachments to such specific people, then would our ability to love more people without the fear of abandonment, without jealousy, possessiveness, would that be more innate for us?
To be determined. Polyamory is on the rise, so check in later and we'll see.
The next is the impact of agricultural practices. I'm very excited to share this information.
Okay.
Agricultural practices introduced the concept of private property, which led to societal enforcement of relationships composed of one man with one or more wives.
Okay, see, this is what I was getting at. The whole concept of private property, which is inherently just theft, possession of something that is not actually yours.
True.
All of that, like the agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, etc., all of these things create this hoarder mentality, I think. And that is what is sickening like our minds. And then that somehow also translating to relationships and interpersonal human connections.
And women being viewed as property as well.
Correct, yeah.
Before agricultural practices, early humans had little need to worry about individual resources because private property was limited to what a person could carry. Post-agriculture, individual humans were suddenly rewarded if they claimed ownership over a swath of land. A man could suddenly pass down real estate if he could identify his heirs and could now benefit from being monogamous or polygamous.
Right, so the whole piece of identifying which one is your kid, and that just means no more group sex.
Yeah, and I mean, needing to identify like your rightful heir suddenly becomes important.
Right.
And women who used to be viewed as equal to men were now seen as resources to be controlled and are punished if they seek out polydynamics that they enjoyed before.
Because then whose kid is who?
So I don't know, to y'all, this is starting to make sense to me.
Okay, yeah, I'm seeing it now.
So our next example is that religious and scientific institutions have historically claimed that women lack sexual appetite, when simultaneously these organizations have worked to suppress female sexuality.
Correct. Yeah.
Duh.
I get it now. That supports the point of women being discouraged from seeking things like group sex, etc., not, biologically selecting which sperm is the best for the offspring.
Exactly. And I mean, most modern societies are enforcing this by labeling women who are engaging in sexual promiscuity as like S-slurs. Which on this podcast, we don't view the word slut as a dirty word. Or like whores, things like this. Like really diminishing your value as a person if you engage in your own pleasure.
Right, which is why for so long, and still to this day for some people, it is like sought out that like if a girl has the fewest sexual partners or like is a virgin, like they're like the most pure.
So desirable. So cultures across the globe are also artificially limiting female pleasure by removing the clitoris, which kind of shows that it's like, it shows that in order to create this facade that women don't enjoy pleasure, you have to mutilate us.
That's disgusting.
Yeah. So the female orgasm is also treated as too difficult to achieve and is given lesser importance.
You're just bad at it.
An example of the scientific minimization of female pleasure was Sigmund Freud, who argued that while women can orgasm from the clitoris, more mature women prefer penetrative orgasms.
Mature.
Yeah. And he reduced the clitoral orgasm to a childish experience.
He would know. He would know what the female orgasm feels like.
Yeah. And he argued that women should avoid it. So this sounds like
avoid it.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Oh my God.
Yeah.
What a sigma.
This sounds like a man who could not find the clit.
Couldn't find the clit. He couldn't make her come.
Yeah.
He couldn't please her in any way whatsoever. So he was like, this is actually not desirable and must be avoided at all times because more mature women prefer penetrative sex, and I'm a little bitch.
Our next point here is while patriarchal societies often subjugate women, matriarchal societies tend to improve the livelihood and autonomy of men.
Say more right now.
Okay. Anthropologists often struggle to identify matriarchal societies because they expect them to reflect patriarchy. When they notice that the men seem happy and not oppressed, they conclude that males must be in charge. However, males and females wield social power in different ways. Under patriarchy, men men seek to control women, but under matriarchy, women seek to promote social cohesion and individual autonomy for all members. I think this is a really good example of the confirmation bias that we were explaining before. Just the fact that they aren't allowing themselves to have a deeper look at this, that it could be a matriarchal society. They're like, that's an example that patriarchy is natural.
Right.
Confirmed we're heading in the right direction.
Patriarchy means men oppress women. Matriarchy means that women oppress men.
It would have to look the same.
It has to. I don't know about that. I don't know. Doesn't sound right.
So our next part is teamwork and generosity can be just as advantageous to a species' development as selfishness and greed. Historically, scientists have tended to label society's aggressive and negative impulses as animalistic, while using benevolent impulses as proof that humans can rise above our base instincts. This false dichotomy stems in part from a misunderstanding of evolutionary theory. Even if teamwork and sociability came naturally to a species, those tendencies can be suppressed by an artificial environment. So this study is pretty interesting.
Okay.
A 2015 study published in the Journal of Environmental Psychology suggests that modern humanity's tendency towards social isolation is a product of living in industrialized settings rather than a helpful adaptation promoted by evolution.
I agree. Yeah, it's not a healthy thing. Do you know how many people are depressed or lonely or antisocial? Sadder and lonelier than ever before. Like, how is that healthy?
We're disconnected from nature. We're sitting in such an unnatural way, staring at a computer screen all day. None of this is natural.
You're staring at a computer screen right now.
In this study, participants were shown videos of nature and videos of architectural settings and then grouped together and asked to solve a problem. The participants were more likely to be cooperative and helpful when they viewed the nature video, and they were less likely, of course, when they viewed the architectural video.
Whoa.
Yeah, so researchers theorize that our inability to solve broad social problems such as climate change is a result of our disconnection to nature.
Oh, okay. This is blowing my mind right now. This is making so much sense. How can you solve a problem that you're not at all connected to?
And this shows too is like if we were in a natural environment, which is like what we're trying to prove that something is natural, then teamwork and generosity would be viewed as more like natural and innate skills, but our environment is making us more aggressive. Our environment is making us more selfish, more disconnected, more isolated, more lonely. It's actually causing so many social issues.
Yeah. And I think it's also a disservice to human nature to say that you can rise above instinct or rise above what is natural, because I don't agree with instinct or nature inherently being a bad thing. Everything in your body that is instinct is trying to help you. And it's about how you wield it, how you use it, that determines whether or not you are destructive or helpful.
That kind of wraps up our like sex at dawn argument.
Okay.
But I have a few more pieces from some other scientists that I would love to share.
But before we get into that, this podcast is proudly sponsored by Vizzy Hard Seltzer. And with Vizzy's vibrant flavors, you can now follow your own vibe.
For those of you who know Queer Collective, you know that Vizzy has been a longtime supporter of us and our mission to create accurate and positive representation for the entire queer community. So if you are a hard seltzer drinker, we highly recommend drinking and supporting one that you know also supports the queer community. These past 7 months, we've been having a really incredible time exploring ethical non-monogamy in our own relationship because we're dating.
And a huge catalyst for this change has genuinely been exploring things on Field. For those of you who don't know, Field is a dating app geared towards polyamory, ethical non-monogamy, and kink.
If this sounds like something you're interested in exploring, we definitely recommend downloading Field. That's FEELD.
And now, back to the episode.
Dan Savage, who's a sex columnist, had some interesting things to say.
Okay.
Men historically were never expected to be monogamous, and over time, as marriage shifted from a property transaction to a union of two equals, instead of giving women the same liberations as men have had, we place the same expectation of restriction onto men. There's still 9 countries where women can be killed for cheating, and the result is a lot of cheating in failed relationships.
That's crazy.
Dan obviously is pointing to the fact that like during agricultural practices, we've shifted to like making women property.
Yeah.
And like that is the whole basis of a marriage. But instead of like, okay, that didn't really work, let's go backwards, give everyone the same liberation.
Right.
Where like both of you are restricted now. He believes that monogamy is ridiculous and people aren't any good at it. He doesn't think it's natural and it places a tremendous strain on a marriage and a long-term partnership to expect them to be effortlessly monogamous.
Not just that, but to expect the other person to be your everything seems impossible to ask of one person.
And this whole idea too, where it's like you're liking another person's Instagram post, like these really micro ideas, because everyone has a different idea of what cheating is.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But people who expect very strict monogamy, where it's like, don't look at another person, don't text
even,
another person,
don't even
do this.
think about another person.
Yeah, it's like, whoa, you can't do mind control.
Can you?
Maybe if you try hard enough. We're just kidding. Don't do that. It's not healthy.
Don't do that,
don't
Buki.
do mind control, Buki. It's not good. So we've said if you're in love, you won't want to have sex with anybody else. And what we need to tell people is that if you're in love, you can make a monogamous commitment and you will refrain from having sex with other people, but you will still desperately want to.
Well, I don't know if desperately is the right word. I don't necessarily agree with that. But I do think that it's impossible, even if you're in a deeply committed monogamous relationship, to not have desires that come up, or even just attraction, even if you do nothing about it.
Or isn't watching porn and thinking about this person, like fantasizing about someone, like these things happen.
Absolutely.
You know, you're going to have fantasies that are outside of your partner. We talked about that in our kink episode.
Go watch it.
Because of these misconceptions, when some people meet someone new and find a romantic and or sexual attraction, they believe it must mean that they're not in love with their partner anymore, or they feel threatened when their partners are attracted to other people.
Okay.
So I think this is why some people will end a marriage or say my marriage is failing, because they have this expectation that if I'm good at being monogamous, I shouldn't be having these fantasies. So that must mean that this relationship isn't good anymore. It needs to end, et cetera, et cetera. But in reality, it just may point to the fact that we're not naturally monogamous and there's nothing wrong with this relationship. It's just like at a later point.
Right.
You know?
That is a tough thing to struggle with, because I've thought the same thing. I've thought that like I must be really bad at relationships if I'm having other desires or other fantasies like outside of our own relationship. And it's tough. Like I have felt a lot of guilt sometimes still, you know, because it's what we're taught that we're supposed to do. And it's really, I think, difficult to internally dismantle it.
So Dan also says that we view monogamy the way that we talk about virginity. That you're monogamous until you've done something outside of the relationship, then you've ruined it and you've popped your monogamy cherry and you've destroyed your monogamous relationship. But he believes that we need to talk about monogamy the way that we talk about sobriety, which you can be monogamous and fall off the wagon and then sober back up.
Right.
The truth is, if you're with someone for 40 years and they only cheat on you a few times, then they were good at being monogamous, not bad at it. Which is an interesting perspective.
Very interesting perspective, yeah. Because, you know, we don't think about it that way.
No.
That if you did something for 40 years, but you had a few falters, say a handful, then you were still pretty good at it. I've never thought about it like that. But it would be the case for pretty much anything else.
Exactly. And I think the way that we speak about cheating specifically is like, you label someone as a cheater and it's like you can't change a cheater. Like break up with them. There's no way they can be better. And I think some people are definitely serial cheaters.
For sure. Maybe they're just polyamorous.
And they haven't found the lingo. But I think that it shows that we really put people in a box and we don't say that like someone can improve or be better. We don't just see monogamy as like not really a natural thing to achieve. And I think trying to fit in that box can freak people out.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's why people avoid relationships for the longest time. And that's why we have shows like Too Hot to Handle or Love is Blind.
True.
People have this idea or this perception of like what a relationship, a marriage is supposed to be. And therefore they are afraid to commit to it or don't want to or don't feel that they have the capacity to do so, but because it's so the norm, they desire it so badly.
I wanted to kind of circle back around because, of course, like I said, the jealousy and possessiveness element was something that really stood out to me. So I went on a little searchy search. I was wondering, like, is it a sign that we're not meant to be polyamorous?
Is it?
But what I found is that jealousy is a human emotion, but it doesn't belong to the original 6 emotions. It actually comes around 18 months, and it only begins once you have enough sense of self. And until the 90s, there were plenty of articles in the US around jealousy. But then at some point, it all disappeared because the notion was that you shouldn't feel jealousy. And if you do, it's something wrong rather than it just being an experience of life. Jealousy is a natural emotion. It's okay to feel it. And it doesn't necessarily mean anything bad. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be monogamous. It just means you are experiencing an emotion.
Something that was said in, I believe it was our first polyamorous episode, where Yaz said that jealousy is an emotion that can point us to our deeper desires that lie underneath.
Also, the point here is like you do experience jealousy when you're in monogamy. It's just like sometimes you're shielded from it more. But I think some people who are just very jealous people or slightly more insecure are actively experiencing it in monogamy.
Absolutely. Coming back to the example of like more extremist shows, like whether it be Love is Blind or like, you know, those lovey shows, The Ultimatum, etc. You can see very clear examples of heightened jealousy in those shows. And they really use marriage as a sense of self-security. They think to themselves, well, if we're married, then for sure nothing bad is going to happen. For sure, I'll never be jealous again. Or this person will never cheat on me. Or this person will never even think about another person again. That's not true.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like this false sense of security, especially when we look at divorce rates and infidelity rates. There was one interesting quote here from a biology professor, David Barash, who argues that just because monogamy isn't natural to the human species doesn't mean it isn't possible or even desirable. In fact, we often do those things best that don't come easily to us.
I think they're both natural.
Yeah.
In my opinion. Like some people really thrive on monogamy. Some people really thrive on polyamory. Some people really thrive on something in between.
Yeah. So does what model is actually like the most natural? Does it matter?
No. I think it's just what works for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should design our lives and our relationships in what is best suited to us.
Yeah, based on our desires, our capacities, our boundaries, etc.
And like I said, there's nothing natural about the way that we live our lives today. So why should we be relating back to a humanity from millions and millions of years ago who was living their lives in a completely different way? Like when we're zooming through a metal tube on our way to work to sit at a computer for 8 hours a day and staring at our phone forever. Like there's nothing natural about the way that we live our lives. So why should, whether or not our relationship structure is natural, why should that matter?
Right. That's a good point.
So this next section that I want to get into is polyamory throughout history. When we refer back to some ancient civilizations, it's going to be globally, but modern polyamory kind of is believed to have stemmed out of the US. So because we're in the Western world, I did focus on the Western world, but let's start with the presence of polyamory in early civilization. Our first example is pre-colonial indigenous cultures in North America. So our first example is the Ojibwe, Cherokee, and the Lakota tribes. So some indigenous cultures in North America had flexible and fluid concepts of relationships. While not strictly labeled as polyamory, these cultures practiced forms of non-monogamous relationships where individuals could have multiple partners, and the community valued consent and mutual respect. This information has been passed down through oral histories and anthropological studies from researchers such as Ruth Landis and others. Our next example is ancient Greece. Some philosophical circles in ancient Greece, especially within the context of the Platonic tradition, encouraged relationships that were based on love and intellectual connection rather than strict monogamy. These relationships often existed alongside other partnerships. The evidence of this existing can be found in philosophical texts from writers like Plato and Socrates, who discuss relationships based on intellectual and emotional connections, which were not always confined to a single partner. We've also seen evidence in ancient Greek literature, such as the works of Sappho.
Love a Sappho. Yep.
who
Love her.
hints at non-monogamous relationships, particularly within certain social and intellectual circles. So for y'all who checked out our entire history of lesbians, y'all already know who Sappho is. It's connected to the word sapphic, if you want a little hint.
The lesbian mom of history.
The next is the Pueblo cultures from the southwestern United States. So among the Pueblo people, there were practices of non-monogamy that could be seen as early forms of polyamory. And relationships were often communal, with shared responsibilities and fluid boundaries between partners.
Fluids.
Wink.
Okay.
So this was found through ethnographic research. Studies by anthropologists such as Elsie Clues Parsons have documented that communal living arrangements and flexible relationship structures within Pueblo cultures. These studies show that marriages was often seen as more of a social contract than a romantic one, allowing for multiple partnerships. And some more similar examples were in Malaysia from the Trobriand Islanders, and they were all also early Christianity in the Gnostic traditions. And also you'll be able to see this in early Chinese dynasties. The next that I would love to share is some from certain African cultures, which practice forms of non-monogamy that went beyond polygamy. For instance, among the Mosuo people in China who have Tibetan roots, relationships were non-exclusive, with individuals engaging in multiple partnerships that were consensual and socially accepted. While this isn't polyamory in the modern sense, it reflects a non-monogamous approach to relationships, which is kind of the best we're going to get in like ancient cultures, because the concept and like the structure and like the academic side of polyamory is a fairly recent ideology.
Yeah.
The next is tantric traditions in India. So in some tantric practices, sexual and romantic relationships were viewed as a path to spiritual enlightenment.
Oh.
These practices often involved multiple partners, with the emphasis on mutual respect and spiritual growth rather than monogamy. And the interesting thing, and why I really wanted to share the one about Tantra, is that this kind of comes up throughout the more recent history of polyamory with its ties to tantric traditions. Ancient tantric scriptures, such as the Tantras, describe rituals and practices that involve sexual rites with multiple partners, and these practices were seen as a path to spiritual enlightenment, emphasizing the transcendence of traditional monogamous norms. There's also archaeological evidence in temples dedicated to tantric deities, such as those in, I might say this wrong, in Kahahuro.
What? There's no way you said that right. Let me take a look.
I'm sweaty. These are big words, everyone.
Based on the spelling, it could be Kajuro or it could be like Kahuro.
I feel like it's Kahuro.
Pardon our pronunciation.
So in these temples, it depicts scenes of group sexual activity, which some scholars interpret as evidence of non-monogamous practices within tantric communities.
So having sex for enlightenment. I like that.
That's why I do it. That concludes our ancient section.
Surely there's lots more ancient times that we can pull from for examples, but we're not trying to have the longest podcast ever, so we have summarized it into a few.
So enter stage left. The widespread implementation of agricultural practices, capitalism, and patriarchy.
Gasp, the drama.
We're in the 1800s, the 19th century. That's kind of where a lot of polyamory started. It happened in a lot of like small communes and things like that.
A commune's always a dangerous thing. You know what I'm saying?
Okay. So one really interesting thing is that I believe after this is that the advent of polyamory and ethical non-monogamy is really tied to socialism, whereas monogamy is definitely tied to capitalism and patriarchy. The first person we want to talk about here is Charles Fourier, who was an early influential French socialist thinker from the early 19th century and one of the founders of Utopian socialism. One thing I also want to say is that he did have anti-Semitic views and did support the idea of Jews returning to Palestine.
Oh.
So there's that. He believed that concern and cooperation were the keys to achieving social success. A society that works together would experience remarkable improvements. Workers should be rewarded according to their contributions.
Fair and square.
So this is basically like kind of at this time we have like capitalism on the rise, but there's a lot of people who are like, hey, I don't think that's a good idea. He envisioned practical communities where this cooperation could thrive. He wanted to eradicate poverty by reducing the gap between the haves and the have-nots. and he wanted people to be paid more for doing the undesirable jobs. So he was early to write on feminism and an early supporter of women's emancipation, stating that the expansion of women's rights is the basic principle of all social progress.
Correct. He had some correct ideas.
He was also a supporter of gay rights. Yay,
Hey,
gay rights.
Woohoo, ally.
At a time when this was almost unheard of, before the advent of the term homosexuality, he believed that humans have a legitimate need for a wide range of sexual preferences, and he also defended deviations from gender norms.
Oh, I love that. He has so many good ideas. What's with the Jewish thing?
I don't know. What's up with that Jewish thing?
That's so specific. Why?
So in 1844, Fourier's writings made their way to America.
America. Fuck yeah.
When Ackbert, great name, Brisbane, translated the works into English and published them into columns in the New York Tribune, where they reached a large audience. This brought on the Oneida community, which was in the mid to late 1800s. Would you be surprised to find out that the history of polyamory is tied to the silverware business?
What are
Yeah.
you talking about?
Random.
Because they can eat?
Pussy.
Oh, shit.
Buckle up, because I've got a culty story for you, which I know you love.
I love a culty story and a cunty story.
That starts with the Oneida community, which was founded by John Noyes in 1848 and grew to 300 members in its heyday and was said to be a utopian community.
Oh my God. John Noyes?
Yeah.
John, fuck all that noise.
He really said that about capitalism.
About capitalism and the patriarchy.
And monogamy. He was like,
yeah.
fuck all that. John, fuck all that noise. Yeah. So one of the communities, of course, that formed as an indirect result of Fourier's writing was the Oneida community. And it was a spiritual community that was following the example of early Christians and held all property in common and attempted to overcome traditional gender roles. So it was like everything belongs to everyone, and they were trying to like overcome this idea that women were property. The most controversial aspect of the infamous project was the doctrine of complex marriage. In complex marriage, all men and women within the community were considered married to each other. Even couples who were already married when joining were required to have separate rooms and open their relationships to others.
Oh, interesting. I don't know about that.
It continues. So no two people could have exclusive attachment with each other and would be separated and not allowed to see each other for a certain length of time if it was suspected that they were like gaining an attachment.
Oh, darn.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not the best, is it?
It's interesting. Men were expected to withhold ejaculation unless conception was intended to provide women with greater sexual satisfaction and fewer pregnancies.
Okay, very culty.
Yeah. This was a huge departure, though, from Victorian standards, which did not support women taking pleasure in sex at all. Like,
Right.
we heard what Freud had to say over there.
Right.
Yeah.
The clitoris does not exist.
Exactly. While there were progressive elements of Oneida, there were definitely engaging in practices of eugenics. So this would be like where Noyes would pick and choose who could procreate with who. And in this case, it was said that he would pair together inappropriate age matches.
Oh, that's not right.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Under the gaze of more mature members, initiating the younger ones into sexual and spiritual practices.
Oh, boy.
Kind of gross.
That's giving gross.
Oneidians felt that achieving perfection and living without sin required that they abandon traditional marriage. Noyes believed that the spiritual dimension of sex brought partners closer to God and to each other. And the new commandment is that we love one another, not by pairs, as in the world, but in mass, he decreed. In theory, it eliminated jealousy and possessiveness by marrying everyone and encouraging frequent lovemaking with multiple partners. The author of Polyamory in the 21st Century, which is where I got a lot of this research from, her name is Deborah Annapol. She noted that there is a potential link between Oneida, modern polyamory, and tantric lovemaking.
Interesting.
So although she has not been able to discover a direct link between Noyes and tantric teachings, she notes that his spiritual doctrine of perfectionism, his emphasis on the sacredness of sexuality, and the sexual practice of non-ejaculation for men can all be found in ancient tantric teachings.
They're just always edging.
So, are you wondering, or did you forget? What about the silverware.
Oh, right. I did forget.
Yeah.
So how does this tie to forks and knives?
Yeah. In 1881, they abandoned their complex marriage doctrine amidst legal pressure and morphed Oneida into a corporate enterprise, Oneida Limited, which continues to this day as a successful silverware company.
You're kidding.
Yeah, to this day.
Oneida Max Wing.
Our next segment is Emma Goldman, Free Love, and the first wave of the sexual revolution, which was in the 1920s. So when you hear the term free love, what do you think of? For me, like the 60s and 70s comes up a lot, right?
Really? Okay.
Yeah, right? Like the hippie movement, free love.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now I see where you're going.
Yeah. The original free love movement actually took place in the Roaring 20s. A decade of economic growth and widespread prosperity driven by the recovery from the First World War. And this period of time was huge for women's rights, as it required women to enter the workforce for the first time while their husbands were away at war. And as a result, many women enjoyed the financial independence and didn't want to leave. In the 1920s, the term free love carried a very different meaning than it did in the 1960s. Originally, it implied freedom for women from the ownership of men through the institution of marriage.
Oh, right. Women aren't property no more. Right.
The term's creation at the time was attributed to the Oneida founder, John Noyes, whose version of free love could be likened to today's term of polyfidelity, which is a type of closed group marriage. Enter stage right, Emma Goldman. Contrary to Noyes, Goldman and her fellow anarchist didn't believe in imposing any kind of structure or rules on the free flow of love. Emma Goldman was a feminist anarchist who devoted her life to organizing support for the independence of women at a time when women in the United States had not yet won the right to vote, and at a time when advocating access to birth control was grounds for imprisonment.
That's pretty badass. Bad lady.
And she's often credited with bringing sexual liberty and reproductive rights into serious political conversation.
Oh, good for her.
In 1930, Goldman wrote, and I quote, "I demand the independence of women, her right to support herself, to live for herself, to love whoever she pleases, or as many as she pleases. I demand freedom for both sexes, freedom of action, freedom in love, and freedom in motherhood."
Fantastic work for cis women in power.
Yeah. So now enter stage left, Victoria Woodhull. So she was another early feminist and free love advocate and the first woman to run for president.
Oh, that's crazy. What?
Not Hillary Clinton.
Not Hillary Clinton.
Not Hillary Clinton. Her and Emma Goldman did more than theorize about free love. Both women boldly exercised their right to love whoever they pleased at a time when even monogamous, sexual active, unmarried women were considered sluts.
Which is a positive.
Yeah. So
positive.
Woodhull was even known to have openly engaged in triadic love relationships, including one with a prominent Christian minister. And it caused a national scandal.
That is a scandal.
We do love a scandal.
I love it.
Would you be surprised if I told you that the invention of the term polyamory was connected to science fiction novels and neo-paganism?
What's neo-paganism? Sounds like pegging.
Are you surprised or not?
Yes.
Thanks. This is tied into Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land, which is published in 1960. The spread of polyamory as a model or support system can be tied to its popularity as a topic, with many science fiction and fantasy writers. So Robert Heinlein, his book Stranger in a Stranger Land, published in 1960, is a science fiction book that was said to have kicked off present-day evolution of polyamory.
How so?
The novel features a Martian-raised human hero who finds a concept of sexual possessiveness very peculiar and starts a religion based on sharing.
I love sharing.
The idea in the book struck a deep chord with its millions of readers, but unfortunately the text didn't really age well. And you'll find lots of sexist language in it. But
yikes. Nothing's ever perfect.
No. Take what you can get.
Why was this book in particular so influential?
Some portion of this may have to do with the neo-pagan leader, Oberon Zell. So he was the founder of the Church of All Worlds, also known as Ka.
What?
Ka.
C-A-W.
Yeah, it's fucking sick. Neo-paganism, let's get it. He was also the publisher of Green Egg magazine, which was an early neo-pagan periodical. He and his wife, Morning Glory, had been in a triad for many years with the magazine editor.
His wife's name is Morning Glory?
I know, yeah.
What?
So kind of culty. They later formed a group marriage with 3 other individuals, which incorporated many of Heinlein's ideas. The Church of All Worlds was inspired by and based on the novel Stranger in a Strange Land. And has done a lot to spread ethical non-monogamous beliefs among the pagan communities in the US. So now how this is tied into the invention of the term polyamory, which was invented in 1990. Morning Glory, who's Zell's wife, is credited for inventing the term polyamory in her 1990 essay titled A Bouquet of Lovers, which articulated the idea of loving multiple people simultaneously in an ethical and consensual way. Zell's also asserted that polyamory has really caught on as a wide primary relationship model for the younger generation, especially in the worldwide pagan community, which is estimated at 10 million adherents and growing. He states that in the pagan community, polyamory is so well accepted as an option, even an ideal, that those of us who engage in it don't even merit a raised eyebrow, which is far from it being seen as scandalous, which would have been the case prior to the 60s.
That's some big work that they did.
Now, enter in the Second American Sexual Revolution, which was from 1964 to 1984.
Okay.
This was also known as the free love movement, which was a significant precursor to the modern non-monogamous movement, including polyamory. So more context here on the free love movement. It was part of the hippie movement that was a nonviolent response in resistance to the Vietnam and Cold War. The movement is known for the advent of psychedelic rock and drugs, free love, government mistrust, and a desire to move away from the capitalist ideas of their parents' generation.
Yeah, peace and love, everybody.
Yeah. The free love movement arose as part of a broader rejection of societal norms that were seen as oppressive, particularly those related to sexuality and relationships. So proponents of free love argued that traditional marriage and monogamy were outdated institutions that restricted individual freedom and reinforced patriarchal control over women. Enter the invention of birth control, stage right.
Yikes.
So the availability of birth control in 1960s played a critical role in the free love movement by giving individuals, particularly women, more control over their sexual lives. This newfound sexual autonomy allowed for greater experimentation, especially with non-monogamy, as people could engage in sexual relationships without the fear of unintended pregnancy. The term free love came to imply a sexually active lifestyle with many casual partners, but the movement's initial goal was to separate the state from our sexual and romantic matters such as marriage, birth control, and adultery.
I like that.
Yeah. By advocating for sexual relationships based on mutual respect and consent rather than social or legal obligation, the free love movement questioned the necessity of monogamy, which opened the door to a dramatic shift in sexual values and increasing acceptance of ethical non-monogamy, open marriages, and other experiments in free love. This, again, was tied to communes and collective living.
Of course it is. It's always tied to communes.
Yeah.
Socialism. Damn those commies.
Experimentation with group relationships, similarly to what was going on with the Oneida community in the 1800s, communes and intentional communities that emerged during the 1960s were often centers of experimentations with alternative lifestyles, including non-monogamy, and in these communities, the idea of sharing love and sexual relationships among multiple partners was seen as a way to break down barriers of possessiveness and jealousy that were associated with monogamous marriages.
That's fair. Yeah, there is a lot of that with monogamy. Is there an example of these communities?
Of course. So the Carista commune was one of the most notable examples. It was in San Francisco, and it was founded in 1971 by Judith Judd Applebaum. And others. The commune practiced polyfidelity, a form of non-monogamy in which a closed group of people shared romantic and sexual relationships exclusively within the group. The Carissa commune became an influential model for later polyamorous communities, demonstrating that non-monogamy could be organized around principles of equality, consent, and shared responsibility.
I love that. Setting the example. Applebaum.
This was also happening in the context of Stonewall, the Gay Pride Liberation March, like just to give people like some context at the time.
Finally, some gay shit.
Some gay shit. Of course, a lot of women's sexual and emotional freedom happening as well. We are on to the movement's decline.
Oh, no.
Sadly, this movement came to a close in the 80s due to the AIDS epidemic. There was a lot of fear around sleeping around. The movement also faced significant backlash from mainstream society, which viewed its challenge to traditional gender roles and values as a threat to social order. Yeah.
Well, it does. But as it should.
Yeah. So its impact did plant seeds, though, for the development of polyamory by introducing the idea that love and sexuality do not have to be confined to one person while being ethical. So while the free love movement of the 1960s eventually declined, the ideas and practices it introduced continued in various subcultures and intellectual circles, which led to the eventual rise of polyamory and the full movement in the 1980s and 90s. 1990s, the advent of the term and the advent of the internet. The 90s were a decade of rapid technological advancement, with the rise of the internet playing a key role in connecting people with shared interests. So as the queer community and that greater movement gained visibility, issues of relationship diversity and sexual freedom continued to be prominent in public discourse. There were lots of online poly communities. The internet facilitated the growth of polyamory as a recognized identity, with online forums, lists, and zines helped to connect people practicing. This fostered a sense of community and shared values. This period also saw the formation of advocacy groups like Loving More, which were founded by Ryan Nearing, which worked to increase awareness and acceptance of polyamory.
Wow, okay, so the internet played a big role in widespread information.
For sure. And I think like tying this back to the 1800s with the Oneida community and the thoughts and beliefs of Charles, the reason that a lot of these like initial communist communities were happening was because it was spreading in newspapers, right? Like it got translated and then spread. So really the dissemination of information is so important, especially when we're seeing like a group of people, a country being controlled by a certain idea, whether that be patriarchy, whether that be capitalism. A lot of people don't know monogamy. A lot of people don't know that there's other options out there. So creating these forms of media, the newspaper to the internet, really helps to like spread information and show people that there is something else out there that you can practice.
Absolutely.
Like I said, the invention of the term polyamory happened in the 1990s, and the term was beginning to take form in the 80s. But as we remember, our pal Morning Glory from the Caw was formally credited for inventing the term polyamory in her essay titled A Bouquet of Lovers. So at this time, there was a lot of academic interest. A lot of scholars were studying non-monogamous relationships, and we received a lot of literature like The Ethical Slut, which was published in 1997.
Love that one.
And The New Love Without Limits, which was also published in 1997, my birth year.
Oh my goodness. The birth of polyamory.
Yeah. So these provided a lot of like frameworks and especially like ethical and philosophical ideas around the polyamorous movement. So they're kind of like guidebooks really for people practicing this. During this time, there was also a lot of legal and social challenges happening. So polyamorous relationships face significant challenges, particularly in the areas of marriage, child custody, and societal stigma. So advocacy efforts during this time focused on addressing these challenges and promoting the rights of those in non-traditional relationships. During the 90s, there was a host of legal battles in the US, but I'll provide some examples. Most notably, there was the 1985 to 1990 North Carolina Supreme Court case surrounding child custody. In a widely cited case, a mother in a polyamorous relationship lost custody of her children after the court determined that her lifestyle was not the best of interest for her children. And the court considered her living situation, which included multiple partners, as unstable and immoral.
Yikes.
This case set a precedent that was referenced in the subsequent custody battles throughout the 90s, where polyamorous parents were often at a disadvantage due to the societal biases against non-monogamous relationships.
That's really harsh. And then also it's going back to typically a cis white man in power deciding what is good for other people, especially when they have nothing to do with the situation or know anything about it, and just basically saying, you're too dumb to realize what is good for you, so I'm going to decide for you.
Yeah, infantilizing people, not looking into the situation enough to see, like, is this actually a good living situation, or am I just deeming it not because of my pre-established beliefs and perhaps my religion. This, of course, led to the formation of polyamory advocacy groups in response to these and other legal challenges, like the group Loving More and the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom, which began to form in the 90s. And these organizations work to raise awareness of the legal issues faced by poly individuals and to push for broader recognition of diverse relationship structures. And while legal victories were limited during this decade, the groundwork was laid for future advocacy efforts.
Yeah, I love that.
Enter from the roof, the 2000s to the present day, social media and media representation.
What we got going on now?
Following the AIDS epidemic was the fight for same-sex marriage, which was central to the LGBTQ rights movement in the 2000s. Mm-hmm. We did a gay marriage episode where we talked a lot about how the AIDS epidemic led to a desire for queer folks to have the same legal rights as straight people, to be married, to be able to take care of their partner in their dying hours. And as marriage equality became a mainstream issue, it also brought attention to the limitations of monogamy as the dominant relationship model. Many within the LGBTQ community were already practicing forms of consensual non-monogamy, and the visibility of these practices began to challenge broader societal norms. Same-sex marriage was legalized in 2005 in Canada and in 2015 in the US. A little late, guys.
A little bit.
Next piece was the rise of social media, which is huge. So platforms like MySpace, LiveJournal, and later Facebook, Twitter, Instagram allowed for people to connect in new ways, share their experiences, and form communities around shared interests. For those interested in polyamory, these platforms provided spaces to find like-minded individuals and discuss the challenges and benefits of non-monogamy. And that's definitely like how we found it for sure.
Yeah.
Through our podcast, through dating apps, through all of these things. We found this information online. The founding of polyamory conferences and groups. So the 2000s also saw the establishment of various conferences, meetups, and organizations dedicated to polyamory. We also have increased media representation.
I love that. Where are we finding this media? Yeah. Please do tell.
So the 2000s also saw a rise in media coverage of polyamory with articles in mainstream publications and features on television shows exploring the lives of polyamorous individuals and families. We see reality shows like Big Love, Polyamory, Married and Dating, You, Me, Her, all bringing polyamory into the mainstream entertainment space. We also have podcasts like the Multi-Amory podcast, now us,
ooh,
entering the scene where people are able to share and learn and like discuss further, right? So I think it's taking things from the very grassroots to now seeing like things are a little bit more established.
Yeah.
We have like big funded TV shows. We have like this kind of level of representation where it's not so grassroots anymore.
And big funded podcasts too.
Thanks, Vizzy and Field. We also had some polyamory research and academic studies going on. So the 2010s also saw growth in academic research with studies exploring the psychological, social, and legal aspects of poly relationships. This research has helped to legitimize poly as a valid and healthy relationship choice, contributing to its growth and acceptance in society.
This is revolutionary, y'all.
Big shit happening for sure. An interesting legal development also happened in 2020. So while poly remains outside of the bounds of legal marriage, there have been notable legal developments.
Which are?
So in 2020, Somerville, Massachusetts. How do I say it? Help.
Massachusetts.
This place became the first city in the United States to recognize polyamorous domestic partnerships, granting legal rights to polyamorous relationships. This was a significant step to broader legal recognition of diverse relationship structures.
How did they legalize it? Like, can you get married to more than one person?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Just in that state?
Only there.
Okay.
We also have apps now designed for the ethical non-monogamy community. So Field launched in July 2014, which was founded by Demo and Anna. the pair formed the idea after Anna shared her feelings for a coworker, and the pair decided to open up their relationship. However, once they started to try dating as a couple, they found that none of the existing apps particularly made it easy. So in response, Demo developed what is now called Field. Field has been leading the way to provide diverse sexual and gender identity options and allowing non-monogamous people to link their profiles up to 5 other members, showing your whole polycule.
Ooh.
And apps like Field have been huge advents in E&M culture as a way for the community to easily connect and date like-minded individuals.
I mean, similar to this podcast, how there was no podcast with certain queer topics that were being spoken about in an educational sense. And we were like, we're going to make that.
Exactly. That's what you do.
That's just what you do.
You make the things
you
you
don't see it, you make it.
Exactly. And now I really feel, especially working with Field, they are creating more of like a social element around ethical non-monogamy.
Right.
Like in terms of like events, like there's so much more than an app. Exactly. To end this off, why do you think polyamory has become so popular lately?
That's a good question. I think that it's probably a combination of things. Popularization of polyamory with the widespread of information through the internet. Also, like it wouldn't be popular without there being the desire to be in a polyamorous structure or situation. So there's definitely lots of people with said desires that are just finding out that there are terms for it. And they're like, okay, let me explore this a little bit more. Lastly, maybe it is nature.
Okay.
What do you got?
I feel like social justice movements happening, I think, is like probably a big piece as well throughout this. Like I've been saying, like I think like LGBTQ rights, trans rights, all of these things challenge the greater frameworks. I think that has shown us that like there's other ways to queer your life as well. Like you can queer your relationship structure too.
Right.
You know? And for me, before I found this language, I feel like I always had maybe like an itch for more, but I just didn't know anything other than monogamy. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I was like, this is me, like lock it down. I'm going to be good at this, you know?
Right.
And then once I heard about it, I was like, oh, it kind of like opened things up for me.
Yeah.
So I really feel like it's probably TikTok, Instagram, like information is being so easily spread now.
Yeah.
And people are able to like get on and share their lives in kind of like an influencer way
mean,
where they're like, I'm
absolutely.
a queer polyamorous person. Look at my life. And people are like, wow, I want to model that now.
Right.
We have apps. Like there's so many new ways to connect. And now the information is so easy when that used to be like a really scary thing to approach. Now there's like a bunch of podcasts that can help you through like the struggles of entering polyamory. So it's not quite as hard and bizarre.
Right. I think this really goes back to just what we say again and again about representation being so important, whether that be in like mainstream media or podcasts, YouTube videos, whatever, some sort of media that can be widely shared.
Yeah.
And as well as breaking down stigmas. You know, the more widely accepted that polyamory becomes, the more people that get into it. And I think a huge part of that is because of the breakdown of stigma. They're like, well, people are kind of okay with this now, so maybe I could give it a try. You know, I have a little bit of curiosity in it.
100%. I think also like other kind of like mainstream dating apps are also like allowing you to at least like put in your relationship structure too. So it's like you see it seeping into the mainstream.
Right.
I'm also seeing lots of memes where people are like, where are the monogamous people? So I'm like, is it spreading as much as I think it's spreading? Or
Maybe.
are these just the
or
memes
are you
that
in
I'm
a bubble?
seeing?
Yeah.
That's always my question.
Right.
What I found most interesting about this whole discussion and all of the research I was doing was really that these ideas sprouted from socialism, because I find that monogamy is really tied to like hyper individualism. You know?
And hierarchy. Absolutely.
Capitalism, ownership. It kind of doubled down my confidence in being a polyamorous person, because knowing, I think, the roots of how everything is tied to, and me like really centering queerness in my life, I feel like moving towards a relationship model that is tied to socialist beliefs, feminism, and like freedom, liberation, all of these things, I'm like, that feels more aligned to me than monogamy.
You're just a rebellious one, aren't you?
What was one of your biggest takeaways?
The silverware industry is just not what we thought.
Yeah, crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all of the grueling research that you did for the past 2 weeks to put all of these 22 pages together.
It was fun. I enjoyed it.
Good. I'm glad. And I'm sure that there's a lot more history and information that we could talk about, but this podcast has already gone for far too long, so we'll cut it here.
But if you think I'm missing something that you think is really interesting to the history of polyamory or E&M, I recommend dropping a comment and letting us know, and we can maybe create like a little history forum in the comments.
Drop your comments in the comment section below if you're watching on YouTube. Also, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast app, make sure to leave us a 5-star review because it really does help the podcast out. If you're interested in more polyamorous content, we have 2 episodes with Yaz. There'll be the 2 videos on the left. That's everything that we got for you. And until next time, peace.